The atmosphere inside the airplane buzzed with its usual energy. Businessmen adjusted their ties, families wrangled their carry-ons, and the quiet luxury of first class settled in like a familiar melody. Among the passengers was Barron Trump, the 17-year-old son of former President Donald Trump. Tall, courteous, and unassuming, he settled into his plush, first-class window seat, casually flipping through the in-flight menu. Then, a ripple of excitement coursed through the cabin. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. "It's Clint Eastwood!" Barron glanced up, curiosity sparking in his eyes. Even in his 90s, the legendary actor carried a presence that could silence a room. His weathered face bore the weight of decades, his quiet composure demanding respect without a single word. But there was something else, a hint of fatigue behind those piercing eyes. Barron watched as Clint's assistant spoke in hushed tones with the flight attendant. A seating mishap. First class was fully booked. Clint Eastwood had been bumped to coach. Barron didn't hesitate. The decision came as naturally as breathing. Rising from his seat, he walked over. "Mr. Eastwood, please, take my seat. I insist." The actor paused, his sharp gaze locking onto Barron. A long silence stretched between them. "Son," Clint said finally, his voice gravelly yet warm. "You sure about this?" Barron simply nodded. His mind was already made up. At that moment, neither of them knew that this single act of kindness would change both their lives. Clint sank into the first-class seat, his weathered hands gripping the armrests. He exhaled slowly, adjusting to the unexpected comfort. "You didn't have to do this, kid," he murmured, gratitude laced in his voice. "I wanted to," Barron replied with an easy smile, before disappearing into the economy section. A stunned silence hung in the air. Many passengers recognized Barron. But this was something different. Even the flight attendants exchanged astonished glances. Clint, a man known for his stoicism, sat quietly, absorbing the moment. He leaned back, a rare softness settling into his expression. Meanwhile, in coach, Barron found himself wedged between a chatty salesman and a wailing toddler. The contrast was stark, but he didn't seem to mind. He popped in his headphones, leaned back, and let the steady hum of the plane carry him away. Back in first class, Clint stared out the window, his thoughts swirling. Then, almost instinctively, he reached into his bag, pulled out a notepad, a habit from a lifetime of storytelling, and began to write. Was this the spark of a new story? Something about the boy's selflessness lingered in Clint's mind, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. A quiet nostalgia, a whisper of something deeper. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate was already at work, weaving their paths together in ways neither could predict. Something extraordinary was unfolding, 35,000 feet above the earth. An hour into the flight, turbulence struck. The seatbelt signs flickered on just as the plane jolted violently. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Drinks sloshed over cup rims. Overhead bins rattled ominously. Barron tightened his grip on the armrests, his gaze flicking to the panicked faces around him. The toddler beside him let out a fresh, ear-piercing wail, his cries swallowed by the growing unease in the cabin. In first class, Clint's fingers clenched around the seat. He wasn't the type to rattle easily, but something about this turbulence felt different. More aggressive, more relentless. His sharp eyes flicked toward the back of the plane, searching. He couldn't see Barron, but he thought of him, wondering how the boy was holding up. And then it happened. A deep, unsettling crack echoed through the fuselage. The cabin lights flickered. A collective gasp filled the air. The intercom buzzed, and the pilot's voice, steady but tight, came through. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing severe turbulence due to an unexpected storm system. Please remain calm and stay seated with your seatbelts fastened. Calm. The word felt fragile against the tension in the air. Passengers clung to armrests, eyes wide with fear. Clint exhaled slowly. He had weathered countless storms, both in the sky and in life. But this one felt different. His mind drifted back to the boy who had given up his seat. The turbulence worsened, each violent jolt reverberating through Barron's chest. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, steadying himself. Around him, whispers of prayers filled the air. Strangers reached for each other's hands. The once chatty salesman beside him sat frozen, his knuckles bloodless against the armrest. In first class, Clint turned to the window. Outside, streaks of lightning split the darkness, illuminating the storm raging beyond the glass. His thoughts returned to Barron. Decades of playing heroes on screen had taught him the theatrics of courage. But in that moment, Clint realized something. Real courage wasn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it lived in the quiet, unseen choices. Like a boy giving up his first-class seat for an old man. And now, as the storm raged on, their lives, one at the peak of legacy, the other just beginning his journey, hung precariously in the balance. When the turbulence finally subsided, a fragile calm settled over the cabin. The tension that had gripped the passengers slowly loosened, replaced by deep exhales and nervous laughter. Clint unbuckled his seatbelt and rose. His steps were careful, steadied by years of experience. As he made his way toward the back of the plane, he found Barron sitting upright, his expression composed, though his gaze was distant, lost in thought. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" Clint asked, a small, knowing smile softening his rugged face. Barron blinked, caught off guard. Of course not. Passengers around them stole glances, their eyes widening in disbelief. Clint Eastwood, Hollywood legend, choosing to sit in economy? But Clint didn't seem to care. He squeezed into the cramped seat beside Barron, ignoring the murmurs around them. For the next hour they talked, quietly, thoughtfully, two worlds bridging over the steady hum of the plane. Clint leaned in slightly, his voice low and curious. "Why'd you give up your seat?" Barron shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "It just felt like the right thing to do. You've given so much to people through your movies. I just wanted to give something back." Clint let out a soft chuckle, the sound rough yet warm. "Never thought a seat could mean so much, huh?" Barron smiled. "It's not the seat. It's the gesture." Clint fell quiet, his weathered hands resting on his knees. The weight of decades flickered in his eyes. "You know," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, "people look at me and see a man who's done it all. The movies, the fame, the fortune. But sometimes, I wonder, have I made enough of a difference? Where it really matters?" Barron studied him, thoughtful. Then, with a sincerity beyond his years, he said, "I think you have. You inspire people. Even now, just sitting here, You're making an impact. Something softened in Clint's expression. You're wise beyond your years, kid. Around them, passengers listened, captivated by the unexpected connection unfolding in the dimly lit cabin. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment, a meeting of two souls, each carrying the weight of their own expectations. Flight attendants stole glances, some discreetly snapping photos, knowing this was something rare, something that would be talked about long after the plane touched down. The conversation drifted into deeper waters. Legacy, purpose, the fleeting nature of fame. Barron spoke about his desire to carve his own path, to live a life that meant something beyond a last name. Clint, in turn, shared pieces of his own journey, the struggles, the doubts, the triumphs that shaped the man he became. As the plane finally began its descent, the two exchanged contact information, a silent promise to keep in touch. Before heading back to his seat, Clint placed a firm, steady hand on Barron's shoulder. "You reminded me of something today," he said. "It's not about where you sit. It's about who you sit with." Barron smiled, his eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood, for everything." When the plane touched down, a collective breath seemed to settle over the passengers. The storm hadn't just been in the skies. It had been in their hearts. And somehow, through a simple act of kindness, that storm had been calmed. As Barron and Clint made their way down the aisle, a few passengers who had witnessed the exchange earlier began clapping. The applause spread like wildfire, rippling through the cabin and into the terminal, a rare moment of warmth in a world that often moved too fast to notice. Clint gave a modest nod, his expression unreadable, but touched. Barron, slightly embarrassed, offered a polite smile, unused to this kind of attention. Neither of them realized just how far their moment of kindness had already traveled. A flight attendant, moved by what she had seen, had shared the story online. She described Barron's selfless act, the unexpected bond between two generations, and the quiet wisdom exchanged at 35,000 feet. By the time they reached baggage claim, their story was everywhere. Screens in the terminal flashed headlines. Social media buzzed. The world, hungry for something good, had found its moment. And outside, beyond the automatic doors, a sea of reporters waited. Microphones, cameras, eager voices, clamoring for a quote, a soundbite, a glimpse of the unlikely pair. Clint, ever the composed gentleman, instinctively stepped in front of Barron, shielding him from the chaos. "No comments for now," he said firmly, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded movie screens for decades. With that, he guided Barron toward a waiting car, slipping away from the frenzy before it could swallow them whole. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, Clint glanced at Barron, a knowing look in his eyes. "You ready for this?" Barron exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. "Not really." Clint let out a low chuckle, leaning back into his seat. "You'll be fine, kid. You've got something they can't teach. Heart." And with that, the car disappeared into the night, leaving behind a world forever changed by a single, selfless act.